Welcome to another World Underneath Yap session. Today we will be discussing World Underneath 28 to 30, part 2 of the recent World Underneath update batch. You guys, this video is going to be long as fuck. I'm not gonna spend too long on the intro because I have so much to say, especially for the last World Underneath. Grab some snacks, grab some drinks, get comfy. The usual disclaimer, I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm just sharing my perspective. Okay, without further ado, let's get into World Underneath 28. Onychinus Aesthetics. Okay, this World Underneath, I gotta say, is one of the lighter ones compared to the rest of this batch. The focus of this World Underneath is on our side characters outside of the sunny, beautiful Lincoln. We are going to the dark side. Our beloved N109 Zone. This time, the story revolves around Philip, the twins, and Hank. My first impression when I was reading this was that it felt like I had been thrown into a found family sitcom episode. It was genuinely so much fun to read, but of course, because this is Love and Deepspace, even the fun stories still have lore hiding in the walls. In the end of Homecoming Wings, it was already hinted that Ever has been constantly going into the N109 Zone to retrieve materials from the old Gaia Research Center. So here we're shown that they don't actually just want their old stuff back, they are also going after Philip's inventions. The story of this World Underneath opens after Ever's attack. The odd workshop has been broken into. Unfortunately, Ever had successfully stole some equipment from the workshop, and one of those precious pieces of equipment was a custom wing-type exoskeleton that was supposed to be a gift for Mephisto. As Philip, the person who created this exoskeleton, was complaining about this, Luke and Kieran, who just fought Ever's robots, their ears perked up. That immediately triggers their jealousy, and the precious stolen resource equipment is no longer an issue. The bigger issue is the fact that only the damn bird is getting a new custom gear and they don't. So this becomes the main setup of this World Underneath, retrieving the stolen equipment from Ever. And immediately, I love the dynamic that we are being shown here, because it really feels like we are in some action comedy movie. I like how we're being shown how the Onychinus members work together. It's very chaotic, but somehow also very functional, as if this is what they're used to and this is how they work together. Now it makes sense why the World Underneath is called Onychinus Aesthetics. This story gives every character such a clear aesthetic without needing to over-explain them. Like, of course, the old ex-Ever researcher is driving some crusty, ancient, ugly van. Luke and Kieran feel like chaotic teenagers in the backseat, complaining that the van is not cool enough, shit-talking Philip's driving and immediately getting exposed, and Hank is just there being the cool older brother figure who actually pulls up with the exact black motorcycle with blue flames they were fantasizing about. The story makes the whole chaos feel fun, charismatic, and weirdly warm. I just love this dynamic so much. And I think with the release of this World Underneath, these 4 characters, plus Mephisto, of course, are going to be the integral main side characters for Sylus' story. Like, this is the writers establishing that. And despite it being really, really fun and chaotic in the beginning, this World Underneath is also where so many narrative threads start connecting into one huge web. And we're talking about Ever, the Gaia Research Center, Xander Sciences, Abyssal Chaos, and of course, Philip. This time, Philip is the one tying all of those pieces together. So before we get into the bigger implications, we need to talk about Philip himself. Because Philip's backstory, I gotta say, is a juicy one. So Philip apparently has a twin, and his name is Felix. They are identical twins, and they used to be a part of Ever's experiments. So based on what this story is saying, Felix seems to have had a long-term illness. The story doesn't say he suddenly became sick because of Ever, but it is very intentionally implying that, because it's revealed that Philip is also identified as 303, which is an experimental number, and from what Luke said, everyone with that number in that experiment was an identical twin. Okay, let's derail from all of this Sylus side of the world, and let's just really sit with this quote right here just for a second and think about what it really means and what it's implying. If the characters who had an experimental number, Luke and Kieran, is identified as 808, Philip and Felix is 303, we also have Kevi and Mia from Homecoming Wings, they're also identical twins. It's pretty clear that Ever, for whatever reason, likes to experiment on twins. We also can't forget the characters who have been implied to be twins pretty recently in their lore. Look, I know that this is a myth information, but myths tend to reflect the main story. And you know what this means? This is about to be canon. This information right here is probably going to be canon very, very soon. And if and when it does become canon, the fandom is going to have another cleanse. And the ones who have been reading the lore, people like us, you and me, we will be standing on the sidelines watching it all unfolds because we already know it's going to happen while the fandom sets itself on fire for the 100th time. Mark my words, that is going to happen. If this thing actually becomes canon, that's what's going to happen. Okay, back to this world underneath. It's revealed here that Felix had a minor genetic mutation. We don't know exactly what kind of genetic mutation it was, but based on observation alone, this is not the first time we've seen twins connected to mutations. In Homecoming Wings, we had Kevi and Mia, where Kevi had crystals growing out of his body, and in World Underneath 10, Luke and Kieran also had crystal-related side effects from Ever's experiments before they met Sylus. So I'm not saying Felix definitely had the exact same crystal mutation, but the pattern is there. Ever's experiments on twins, one or both of them develop some kind of mutation or side effect, and if no one intervenes, it usually ends up badly. The difference that Luke and Kieran had from all the other twins, these twins that were experimented on, is that they were extremely lucky. They ran into Sylus, and Sylus was able to stop their mutation with his evol. But not every pair of twins get that chance. Kevi and Mia and Philip and Felix did not. After leaving Ever's operations, after the Chronoriff catastrophe, Philip still had hope. He hoped Xander Sciences would be able to cure Felix's condition. But what sounds too good to be true often is too good to be true because Felix did not survive. Okay, now I want to talk about the thing that blew my mind the most in this world underneath. So in the middle of this whole chase sequence, while they were trying to retrieve the stolen equipment from Ever, we found out that Phillips's ugly little van is not just an ugly little van. This crusty thing is modified to hell. It has offensive and defensive modules, hidden armor, weapons, and apparently an onboard AI. This is one of the modifications that Phil installed in his van, and it's an AI called Phil. At first, Phil seems like your typical high-tech assistant. When Hank asked about it, Philip says it's an intelligent model he trained and it's still in beta testing. When I first read that, I was like, okay, that's interesting. But the detail that stayed in my head was the fact that the writing specifically mentions that Phil's voice sounds exactly like Philip's. And at first, that sounds like a funny little detail, but once we get Phillips's backstory and learn about Felix, his identical twin, that detail suddenly feels a lot less random. And this is where World Underneath 28 suddenly connects back to World Underneath 18 and Abyssal Chaos for me. Because in 18, Mephisto was shown entering a digital world, bypassing digital boundaries and overriding an AI that was already watching, learning, and manipulating humans. So when 28 shows a shadowy pixel crow appearing on Phillips's damaged communication device, scattering into lines of code and vanishing right before Phil speaks in a way that sounds very, very personal. That is connected to 18 for sure. That is connected to Mephisto entering the digital world and Abyssal Chaos. I think Mephisto entered the device for sure. But the question is, what did he access? Because Phil is supposedly just an AI Philip trained, but after Mephisto appears, Phil does not sound like a normal AI anymore. He apologizes. He tells Philip he never blamed him. He basically gives Philip the closure Felix never got to give him while he was alive. But yeah, this is not just an AI, especially not after Abyssal Chaos already showed us Ever experimenting with human consciousness in digital form. At minimum, I think Phil contains something connected to Felix. Maybe his voice data, maybe his memory data, maybe an emotional imprint, or maybe something even closer to consciousness like what we saw in Final Farewell. But more importantly, this reminded me of what Lucius said.
The fountain of Ate's core has nothing to do with your precious research center. Souls can't be shaped, and external devices are useless.
And I keep thinking about that line because 28 makes the boundary between soul, consciousness, memory, and data feel really blurry. Lucius is not just talking about life in a biological sense. He's talking about the soul, the part of a person that cannot simply be forced into shape by machinery. But then we have abyssal chaos, where Ever was experimenting with human consciousness in digital form. They were transferring it, duplicating it, and abandoning it. So even if the soul itself cannot be shaped through external devices, consciousness can clearly be extracted, preserved, or trapped in some kind of digital state. And if Ever's side is experimenting on consciousness and abandoning whatever sentient remnants are left behind, then maybe Sylus' side is doing something different. Not shaping souls by force, like what Lucius said, like what they're trying to do, and not controlling them like Ever does, but finding what was left behind and giving it somewhere to go. If this is where the story is going, then 28 did not just give Philip emotional closure, it may have shown us that the abandoned consciousness thread from Abyssal Chaos is still active, and that the people on Sylus' side may know much more about it than we thought. They may have somewhat accomplished what Lucius is trying to do, but like better, you know? Lore aside, before I move on, I want to zoom out and talk about the character relationships for a second, because this story also says a lot about why people stay loyal to Sylus. Sylus is the big, bad, scary boss man of the N109 Zone. He rules through fear, power, and violence. His reputation is built on danger, but when we look at the people closest to him, their loyalty doesn't seem to come from fear alone. A big part of it comes from the fact that Sylus gives people a place to exist when the rest of the world has already discarded them. He takes in the people who have already been broken, rejected, or marked as disposable, and gives them somewhere to go. He gives them protection, he gives them purpose, and he gives them a place in the N109 Zone. And that is why his inner circle's loyalty feels so believable to me. It's not just because he is powerful, and it's not just because they're scared of him. It's because in his own very Sylus way, he saved them. Anyways, we gotta move on. I love this World Underneath. Up next is World Underneath 29, Above the Ashes. Look, maybe because I know going into this that this is going to be related to Caleb's lore, but I went into this story like tense as fuck. Especially when I saw that the story is going to be about the Farspace Fleet. Like mentally in my head, I had like my hands over my fucking head, bracing for impact. Mainly because I love Caleb very much, and I was so scared that this World Underneath is going to reveal some traumatic shit, and I don't want my Gaga to go through any more traumatic shit. But this World Underneath was very comforting and reassuring. Yeah, that's the feeling it gave me at the end. So, this story is basically about the transfer of power from an old kind of integrity to a new kind of strategy. And it took place before Caleb became the Farspace Fleet colonel. This story explains how he became the colonel. So the character that was put on the spotlight in most of the story is Rufus. Rufus is the former core leader of the Farspace Fleet. He's been with the fleet for over a decade, and he knows the organization deeply. Basically, he's not just a military figure, he is someone the fleet's old identity is built around. So, I guess this story also changed my perspective when it comes to the Farspace Fleet, because for the longest time, I assumed that they have always been involved with Ever since you know, they established themselves in Skyhaven, which is a whole ass floating island that was backed financially and research-wise by Ever. Like, that whole island was only capable of becoming into being because of Ever. But this story shows that the fleet was originally an independent organization, because the beginning shows the conflict and power transfer from the fleet's old independent command structure into Ever's controlled system. And the entry, this story shows us that the takeover happens in stages, and we are seeing it firsthand from Rufus's perspective. The first conflict we see is basically Ever's opening move. They do not enter the fleet through open conquest, they enter through logistics, infrastructure, and supply. So the fleet's quartermaster, who was supposed to manage their internal resources, and one of the fleet's biggest supporters are caught working together to smuggle high-risk protocors, and this forces Rufus to take disciplinary action against them, and once that happens, the fleet loses part of its original support network. And this is where Ever takes the opportunity. Once the old suppliers and internal logistics become unreliable, Ever steps in as the better option. They are already known for protocol technology and advanced systems, so their involvement probably looks practical at first. They can provide resources, improve efficiency, and make the fleet systems run more smoothly. So from the outside, it doesn't look like a takeover yet. It looks like help. But the thing is, the fleet is slowly changing. Not only that Ever's logo started to appear on the docking arms and equipment systems, they also tried to control what the fleet can perceive. One of the things Ever tries to do is dismantle this old signal array called the Sunflower. And the Sunflower is not just some sentimental piece of old fleet equipment. It is literally one of the last things allowing the fleet to receive raw, unfiltered signals from deep space, which is why Rufus pushes back immediately, because Ever's argument sounds reasonable on the surface. They're basically saying, this is old, it's inefficient. Our new algorithm is smarter, faster, cleaner, and it can filter out useless background noise. And in a normal situation, that sounds like an upgrade, but this is deep space. The whole point is that you are dealing with the unknown. So if you let any system decide what counts as important and what counts as noise, then they're not just replacing the fleet's equipment anymore. They're controlling what the fleet is allowed to notice. And for Rufus, that completely goes against what the fleet is supposed to be. The fleet is supposed to explore deep space with independence and conviction, not just sit there and let some algorithm decide reality for them. Seeing how Rufus is so adamant on keeping the old system and basically interfering with Ever's whole objective of taking over the fleet, obviously Rufus becomes the one thing holding them back from taking over completely. Because by this point, Ever already has its hands on almost everything, but there are still a few things they do not fully control yet. And the biggest is the chain of command. Rufus is still there. He is still the captain. He is still the person making the final call. And more importantly, he still upholds the old philosophy of the fleet. Explore deep space independently. Verify the truth yourself. Do not let some algorithm or corporation decide what is worth noticing. And absolutely do not treat human lives like disposable numbers on a spreadsheet. And Ever knows this. That is what makes them so scummy in this world underneath. They don't misunderstand Rufus, they understand him perfectly. They know he is the kind of person who will not ignore a distress signal. So, what do? They use that exact integrity against him. They created a situation where Rufus's own principles become the thing that corners him. And this is where Ever gets disgusting, because the Sunflower that they let him kept does exactly what Rufus said it was supposed to do. It catches something Ever's shiny new algorithm would have filtered out. Faint life support signals from a DAA patrol squadron trapped inside a magnetic storm. And Ever knows Rufus cannot just hear that and walk away. So of course, they already have a solution ready. A suppressor. And they frame this shit like a rescue mission. Send the flagship in, deploy the suppressor, save the squadron and salvage the mutated protocore. But the moment Rufus reaches the center of the storm, the trap reveals itself. The suppressor does not have enough power, and inside that magnetic storm, there are only two possible power sources: Rufus's flagship or the stranded squadron's life support system. So what Ever really did was force Rufus into a choice. Sacrifice the squadron to save the protocore, or refuse, lose the protocore, ruin the mission, and give Ever the perfect excuse to remove him. And while Rufus is sitting there, literally being forced to decide whether the people get to keep breathing, the Ever representative comes through the comms with the most disgusting corporate villain speech ever. He basically tells Rufus that for the greater good, some resource loss is acceptable. Resource loss, that's what they call people. And then he says the research value of this protocol is worth 10 squadrons like them. Like, are you insane? That is not a rescue mission. That is Ever putting human lives on one side of the scale, a research asset on the other, and expecting Rufus to press the button like a good little boy. And the worst part is, they were watching. When Rufus refuses and uses his flagship as a shield, Ever's drones are still circling the dying warship like vultures. They are not there to help. They are there to record his failure, his death, his final moments. This is so fucking disgusting, dude. And just as Rufus was ready to sacrifice himself, a pitch-black fighter jet tears through the energy field. It's freaking Caleb. And the way this scene is written is so dramatic. Caleb immediately gets rid of the drones, cutting off their uplinks and stopping them from recording Rufus's death. In one move, Caleb saves Rufus, destroys Ever's surveillance, and orchestrates his perfect debut as the new colonel. Finally, we get the story of how he became the colonel. Because with Ever's drones gone, they think Rufus is dead. But no, he's alive, hidden away in Caleb's private facility. And this is why this story felt weirdly comforting to me, because I've always known Caleb was smart. I've always known Caleb has been playing 4D chess all this time. He knows how to play the long game. This story really shows that Caleb is not just surviving inside Ever's system, he is actively learning how to use the system against them. He gives Ever the story they want. A failed old captain, a salvaged protocore, a new colonel with a flawless debut. And that's the thing about Caleb, right? His strength is not just brute force, it's his ability to put on the right mask, stand in the middle of enemy territory, and make everyone believe he is playing the role they gave him. He is so convincing that before Rufus even meets him, the first time he sees Caleb's classified file, he already assumes Caleb is just another Ever puppet. I love this entry so much because it really does make Caleb feel like the perfect double agent. He is strategic, patient, calm, and terrifyingly good at turning someone else's script into his own chessboard. This story also gave World Underneath 15 sketches a new angle for me. Because when I first read that World Underneath, I fully thought Caleb was being a fucking dick to Liam's wife. Like the way he stood there and the way Yvette clearly hated him, I was like, okay, fuck, this is ugly. And to be clear, I still think that whole thing was ugly. Yvette's pain is real, Liam's family is suffering. Caleb's role in that system and that whole thing is not just something that we can hand wave away. But after this entry, after this story, this is a confirmation that there's more going on beneath the surface. Because the story shows us that Caleb and Liam is capable of saving people quietly. They're capable of hiding the truth, manipulating the official story, and playing the perfect role in front of Ever, while secretly protecting someone behind the scenes. So now when I think about 15, I'm like, okay, maybe Caleb wasn't just being a dick because of the Turing chip. It also made me extremely curious about Liam's backstory. Because obviously, Caleb would not just choose anyone to be his adjutant. Like, bro, this opens up a whole new web, and I'm so excited. What else? What else does he do? What else did he plant in Ever? I also want to discuss the very iconic few lines at the end here, because this is where the whole world underneath suddenly clicks into place. Rufus looks at Caleb walking away, and this is where he realizes that maybe the fleet does not need another person like him. Not because Rufus failed, but because the battlefield has changed. Rufus thought the fleet needed a lighthouse, someone visible, someone principled. That was him, that was Rufus. But then he sees Caleb, and he realizes that in a world already swallowed by darkness, maybe a small flame is not enough anymore. A flame can be seen, a flame can be surrounded, a flame can be extinguished. But night is different. Night covers. Night hides movement, and night makes it harder for the enemy to know where the real threat is. So when the story says this dark frontier does not need more fire, it needs a greater night, I don't read that as Caleb becoming darkness in a villainous way. I read it as Caleb becoming the kind of protector who can survive inside the darkness. Because Rufus was open resistance, Caleb has to be concealed resistance. And then the next line completes the whole thing, and it's so nice. And hidden at night's end will be the morning finally unsheathed. This is the part that makes this line so powerful, at least to me. Caleb's night is not the destination. It is the method. He's not embracing darkness for just because he's, taking the role of a villain. He's using concealment to protect the possibility of dawn. This world underneath was fucking fantastic. It answered so many questions, but somehow still left me with this hopeful feeling and even more curiosity, because now I really want to see what Caleb is gonna do next. I want to see all the perfectly scripted scenarios he has prepared, all the masks he's gonna wear, all the ways he's gonna move through Ever's system while making them think everything is still under their control. Alright, up next is our last one, World Underneath 30, Fairnight's Edge. My gosh, this World Underneath was such a fucking trip. It is the shortest one out of all the entries in this batch, but somehow it was also such a mindfuck. And I kind of don't want to burst everyone's bubble, but I really feel like this entry is not mainly about the sixth love interest. I'm sorry. I think it's more about the origin of MC, the origin of Ever, and the larger web connecting all of the love interest. I know. I'm sorry. You can still have your sixth love interest theory. I am literally nobody. I'm literally no one. This is just my opinion and I could be wrong. This whole thing could actually be about the sixth love interest, and everything I'm about to say could be completely wrong. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Take everything that I say in every single one of my video with a grain of salt, because I don't know anything. So let's start with the first chapter. On the surface, what we are looking at here is a restricted archive file from the Deepspace Academy. And inside this archive, we see the observations that Deepspace Academy has been compiling and organizing since its founding in the 1960s. These are records about Earth's civilizations, the history of life on Earth, and the species that once existed before disappearing into geological time. So from my perspective, the beginning of this World Underneath feels like a reflection of World Underneath 27, especially when it comes to humanity's nature and curiosity. Even though these are two separate World Underneath entries, the question being asked in the first chapter feels like a very nice reply to what the mommy axolotl said in World Underneath 27 about how humans are just a short period in the scale of Earth's life. World Underneath 27 talks about that idea through a fairy tale lens, and this World Underneath talks about it through an observational lens. And I think that foil is really, really nice because both entries are circling around the same existential idea. One entry shows this idea through story, myth, and a mother explaining the world to her child. The other shows us this idea through restricted archives, scientific observation, and institutional records. Both are existential, but they reflect the state of mind of two different species. And this whole batch of World Underneath entries, especially the last two, has been doing something really interesting because it has been distinguishing organizations affiliated with Ever as their own separate entities, instead of treating them like simple extensions or just clones of Ever. In 29, for example, we saw the Farspace Fleet as its own organization before it was taken over by Ever, and I think this story is doing something similar with the Deepspace Academy and Gaia Research Center. So through these restricted files, we learn more about Ever, but we also learn that the Deepspace Academy is actually side-eyeing them. They are investigating them, and they're trying to understand what Gaia and Ever have been hiding. And I think what stood out to me in the first chapter is that the story or the writers are highlighting an important thing, that Ever is not the only organization that has been documenting life on Earth. And Chapter 2 of this World Underneath is pretty much showing us that the Deepspace Academy has been watching the civilizations tied to the OG3, the Backtrackers, the Lemurians, and the Fractal Library. I don't think I need to break down why these are tied to the OG3, because if you read the observation logs, it is pretty obvious. The first one is Xavier's, the second one is Raphael's, the third one is Zane's. But the chapters after that are where things get a bit more vague. And obviously, the writers are doing that on purpose. But I do think we have an idea of who they are referring to in chapter 3. Data file number 1 seems to be an observation of one of Ever's experiments, and it feels very similar to what we've seen in Abyssal Chaos. It talks about a facility under Ever trying to achieve a primitive form of life digitization by extracting the consciousness of fruit flies. And this feels like another failed version of what Ever has been trying to do for a long time. Preserving consciousness, moving life into another form, keeping something alive outside of its original body. I'm referring to Abyssal Chaos, of course. Then data file number 2 talks about a massive unidentified creature emerging from the woods behind an estate in Lincoln's southern suburbs during a nocturnal sampling expedition. And when I first read that, I was like, what the fuck? A massive unidentified creature? Like a monster? But after reading data file number 3, it became very clear who this whole section is probably pointing toward. Because data file number 3 says a drone detected some heat signature, and then the recording was forcibly intercepted and wiped by security systems before it could be uploaded to the cloud. This is Sylus. Or Mephisto. Because this is something very similar to what we've seen before in Sylus' story. In World Underneath
18,
Mephisto reprogrammed a very powerful AI, Wantani. And in 28, we saw how Mephisto somehow updated or brought back Felix's consciousness in the digital space. And even long before Sylus' debut in long-awaited Revelry, the only reason MC was able to find footage of Sylus' voice on the dark web was because he allowed that footage to be discovered. So when it comes to digital takeover, consciousness, hacking, erased footage, intercepted recordings, all of that suspicious tech bullshit, it leans very, very, very heavily towards Sylus. As for the unidentified creature in data file number 2, I'm not completely sure what it could be, but maybe it's connected to Sylus' dragon or fiend form. Especially because the file specifically mentions that this happened during a nocturnal sampling expedition. Like, come on. Nocturnal? And then there's the memory wipe at the end of chapter 3, which is really interesting. And I don't know exactly what this is about yet. It could be tied to Sylus, or it could be something else entirely. But if we think back to World Underneath 10, and even throughout Sylus' story, it has been mentioned that almost no one seems to know what he actually looks like unless they work directly under him or have done business with him. Even in the N109 Zone, his appearance is always shrouded in rumors, which I always thought was kind of weird. Like, he rules that whole fucking city. Like, how does no one there knows what he looks like unless they're like working for him? So maybe this is the writers giving us a hint that we might get an answer to that soon. Maybe there's a reason why people can't properly remember what they saw, or maybe the memory wipe thing is something else entirely. Maybe it's not about Sylus whatsoever. Okay, now chapter 4. Chapter 4 blew my fucking mind because this chapter just opened up a whole new web for the Lads universe. The world building just got bigger. First of all, the reveal that the Gaia Research Center may not have originated from ever. What the fuck? This is huge because it complicates MC's origin. Like, yes, we know she is part of the cosmos, we know she's connected to inexhaustible energy, but I'm talking about what triggered her existence here, in this timeline, through the Gaia Research Center, because if Gaia was backed by a mysterious family, and Gaia is tied to MC's creation, then MC was not simply created by Ever. She may be the result of a project enabled by an old power structure that predates the current main story version of Ever. The file even says Gaia could have been a preemptive arrangement by its backers. I don't know about you, but to me this is like saying that Gaia is a hidden institution planted inside Ever's rise. Okay, let's talk about Gaia for a second before we talk about anything else, because this whole thing made me feel very validated in my suspicions of Kaleya. I mentioned in my Grand Eradication video that I don't think Kaleya is just a normal villain. If you don't remember what I said in that video, I said Kaleya is sus because she is a catalyst. She does not just trigger a physical event, she triggers MC's identity crisis. And she shows up at key moments and pushes MC one step closer to understanding what she actually is. And this is where the Gaia did not originate from Ever reveal changes the lens. Because if Gaia was a preemptive arrangement by mysterious backers, then the people involved in MC's creation, some of them may belong to an older structure, a hidden network, or a faction that uses Ever as an outer shell. So the fact that Kaleya is in charge of the current Gaia and was also part of the Gaia Research Center back then makes me side-eye her even more. Because now that we know Gaia may not have originated from Ever, it means Kaleya could be tied to that older layer behind Gaia. And also, ever since the Deepspace Signal was mentioned in Death and Rebirth, and then again in To Our Yesterday, there has been one thing that did not add up to me. And the fact that Gaia is now revealed to not originate from Ever makes this make so much more sense. So I'll just play the two different people from two different organizations talking about the signal.
It began in 2034, when humanity received a faint signal from deep space. Once it was decoded, it revealed a story about a planet's quest for immortality. An ordinary planet achieved immortality by harnessing an inexhaustible cosmic energy source. They inspired us.
But only our decrypted information is closest to the truth. Earth
is about to experience a grand eradication. Then the monsters appeared. Geomagnetic disturbances occurred, and mass extinction events were expedited. The warnings in the signal became reality, one at a time.
Do you see the difference? These are two different organizations talking about the same deep space signal, but they are describing it very differently. What Dimitri says is nowhere near the same as what Stanley says. Dimitri talks about a planet's quest for immortality, a story that inspired Gaia to conduct the experiments that eventually created MC. Stanley talks about an apocalypse, a grand eradication, a warning that humanity is about to be abandoned. And Stanley himself says that different institutions competed to decode the signal. Then, if we look at the Deepspace Academy's records in Chapter 5, the end of this world underneath, their version is also different from Stanley's. Stanley says the signal is not an oracle or a prophecy, but the DA's records show that they hypothesized the message to be a prophecy sent to Earth. So I don't think these are just random inconsistencies in writing. I think these are competing decryptions. Dimitri's version, which is the Gaia Research Center's version, Stanley's version, which is Ever's, and Deepspace Academy's version are all looking at the deep space signal through different institutional agendas. And now comes the most important question. Who is actually operating inside this larger machine? And if Gaia did not originate from Ever, then who was actually behind the rise of the Gaia Research Center? Okay, let's break down the sequence of what I think happened. Again, this is just my take. So, based on what is written here, Gaia is the earliest known cross-civilization research institution, and because Ever was tied to Gaia, their rise to prominence seems to have happened alongside Gaia's rise. But when the Deepspace Academy looked into it further, they noticed something suspicious. Gaia may not have simply been a research center created by Ever after Ever became powerful. Instead, it might be the other way around. Gaia may have been one of the reasons Ever rose to prominence in the first place. And this is where things get messy, because if Gaia helped Ever rise, but Gaia itself did not originate from Ever, then who actually placed Gaia in there, in Ever? Because what's written here, it's like saying Gaia may have been planted inside or alongside Ever by an older, hidden power structure, while Ever became the public-facing company that grew around it. This organization is something that's been planted or arranged by its backers as a semi-independent institution operating outside of Ever's system. And then, while the Deepspace Academy was trying to trace that old investment, a new company called Eon Core Tech appeared. So instead of finding clear records about this mysterious family, the DA finds this suspicious new company connected to Protocore Energy, and its chief director has an untraceable background. And this person appears to collaborate closely with Ever, and there are no written or electronic records at all. So to me, it feels like the old money trail is now somehow connected to this new company called Eon Core, which could mean that the family's influence may still be active in the present, but through a newer tech company. So before I tell you who I think this is referring to, I just want to comment on the whole structure of this world underneath so you understand clearly where I'm coming from. Chapter 1 talks about the grand eradication through humanity's observation of Earth's extinction cycles. Chapter 2 covers the civilization tied to the OG3. Chapter 3 seems to tease Sylus, especially with the digital interference, erase footage, strange creature, and memory manipulation. So, if we look at the whole structure of this entry, it feels like the writers are showing us what these organizations have gathered about the larger world and the love interest so far. And based on that structure alone, I think the logical assumption is that Chapter 4 might be connected to Caleb, because the other 4 love interests are already kind of represented here. So writing-wise, structure-wise, it would be weird for them to include everyone else and leave Caleb out completely. Now, I'm not saying Caleb is the mysterious family that supported Gaia during its rise to prominence. I'm not saying that because the timeline does not add up. He would have been a freaking baby when that happened. Actually, he probably did not even exist yet in the main timeline because the DA established itself during in the 1960s, and Gaia is older than that, so the timeline does not add up. But I do think he might be related to Eon Core, or maybe he could even be the chief director himself, because I think in Caleb's held Held Orchard card, there's one very strange line where he says he made a deal with a private tech company. So maybe this section is establishing Caleb's connection to the Gaia Research Center, or at least the modern network surrounding it. And I mean, it does make sense if that is true, because Caleb is kind of the perfect double agent. World Underneath 29 already showed us how capable he is at operating inside a system while hiding what he is actually doing. So if there's a mysterious tech company working closely with Ever while having no traceable records, that does sound like the kind of space Caleb could be moving through. But also, if we are talking about old families, research into immortality, weird DNAs, I also cannot help but think about Xavier, because there must be a reason why the Philosian royal family's DNA is cracked. There must be a reason why the writers gave us so much information in World Underneath 25 about their unique DNA. And if the people on Philos originally came from Earth, and the royal family were the ones who established Philos, and their DNA is already abnormal, then wouldn't that mean the royal family's ancestors must have done something strange with their DNA in the past? Like, something had to happen for their bloodline to become like that. So for now, there's two possibilities. This section might be connected to Caleb or Xavier. Caleb through Eon Core, the private tech company, and the current hidden network around Ever. Xavier through the mysterious family angle, old bloodlines, immortality research, and the possibility that the Philosian royal family has deeper roots in Earth's history than we currently understand. Is this a clue about the sixth love interest? I don't know. It could be, but personally, I kind of doubt it. I mean, I know people are excited about the sixth love interest theories, and you can absolutely still have those theories. I'm not here to ruin anyone's fun. But based on how World Underneath stories usually work, like if you read every single one, they tend to expand the deeper background lore and world building around things that are already structurally important in the main story. And this entry to me feels more like it's expanding the web around Gaia, Ever, MC's origin, and the existing love interests rather than teasing someone completely new. But hey, I'm literally a nobody. I am the same as you. I'm just a fan with one little brain, and my opinions and theories mean absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing, okay? And the ending of this World Underneath, which is chapter 5, is basically the Deepspace Academy's version of the decryption of the Deepspace Signal. And of course, the main point of this chapter is echoing the larger theme that has been repeated throughout the latest main story update, which is an apocalypse. I really like that we finally get to see the version of the signal that has been talked about all this time. This is the Deepspace Academy's decoded version. This is the thing that they claim to be a prophecy sent to Earth. But if you actually read like the first half of the signal, to me, it reads more like an observation rather than a prophecy. The Academy's interpretation is this is probably a prophecy sent by a civilization undergoing annihilation. But the actual message reads more like someone explaining a cosmic mechanism after observing it happen repeatedly. The sender is using very systemic language: entropy, correction mechanisms, resource distribution, conservation of energy. So I think there are two layers here. There is the actual message, which reads more like an observation, and then there is the human interpretation of that message after receiving it. That distinction matters because whoever sent this signal is seen to be saying, hey, this is how the universe works, and I'm showing it to you. It doesn't feel like a warning or a prophecy or anything like that. It really feels just like an observation. And the last page of this entry is even more fascinating because the DA claims that this message came from a civilization undergoing annihilation, or they may have already been annihilated, like they're gone. But then the last part of the signal says, when we awaken, we hope to still share the boundless deep space with them. I don't know about you, but to me, this implies that this civilization may have survived a previous grand eradication. Remember like how the World Underneath 27 talks about the Lemurians going to sleep during an eradication and then they awaken after it? It's kind of like that. That's what this is giving off. Or at the very least, they found some way to preserve themselves through annihilation. The sender may have come from a civilization that already experienced this reset cycle. They know the pattern because they lived through it. So now they are observing Earth, they're observing humanity, nearing the same point and basically saying, hey, we've gone through this and you are approaching it too. We hope you survive, just like we believe we will. And this starts sounding very close to what Dimitri described as immortality. But here's the thing. There is nothing in the Deepspace Academy's version of the Signal that talks about a planet's journey to reach immortality. There is nothing here about harnessing the energy of the cosmos to achieve that immortality. So, yeah, there are missing pieces, and now I really want to see Gaia's version of that decryption because none of that is here. There is definitely more to this, because which civilization sent this signal? Is it tied to one of the civilizations connected to one of the love interests? Or is it meant to be more about MC's lore alone and not focused on any one love interest? And what does awakening even mean here? Like, does awakening refer to whatever happens after a civilization uses an MC-like energy source to survive a reset? Or are they like Lemurians, which are beings who can survive the reset like naturally, like that's woven into their being? Yeah, there's still so many questions unanswered, and this world underneath was fucking packed. Not a lot of answers, actually, like no answers at all. Just hints, like little dots that we can potentially connect to the bigger web of the story. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed spiraling with me. I hope this was not too overwhelming and I did not ramble too much, and I hope it all made sense. The new main story update should be coming very, very soon, and I'm so excited. Oh my god. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you want, and consider subscribing if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye. Business of fruit flies. That was such a mouthful. What did I write? What the digitize? Consciousness digitization? Why can't I say that fucking word? Tells about a facility. This story is saying Philip Felix. What the hell is wrong with my pronunciation today?